Chapter 2, Part 2. Before passing to the next chapter, kindle anew in your mind the fire of hope, faith, courage, and tolerance. If you have these states of mind and a working knowledge of the principle described, all else that you need will come to you when you are ready for it. Let Emerson state the thought in these words: "Every proverb, every book, every byword that belongs to thee for aid and comfort shall surely come home through open or winding passages. Every friend whom not the fantastic will, but the great and tender soul in thee carveth shall lock thee in his embrace." There is a difference between wishing for a thing and being ready to receive it. No one is ready for a thing until he believes he can acquire it. The state of mind must be belief, not mere hope or wish. Open-mindedness is essential for belief. Closed minds do not inspire faith, courage, or belief. Remember, no more effort is required to aim high in life, to demand abundance and prosperity, than is required to accept misery and poverty. A great poet has correctly stated this universal truth through these lines: "I bargained with life for a penny, and life would pay no more. However, I begged at evening, when I counted my scanty store. For life is just an employer, he gives you what you ask. But once you have set the wages, why you must bear the task. I work for a menial hire, only to learn dismayed, that any wage I had asked of life, life would have willingly paid." Mary Kay Ash, the founder of Mary Kay Cosmetics, attributed her success to the development of self-confidence and faith in herself, and in all the people in her vast organization, which now consists of more than 250,000 independent beauty consultants worldwide. Her sales career began 25 years earlier when she joined Stanley Home Products. She often commented that she was not all successful during her first year and was ready to give up. This changed when she attended her first Stanley sales seminar. She reported, "There I saw this tall, svelte, pretty, successful woman crowned queen as a reward for being the best in a company contest. I determined to be that queen the following year, which seemed impossible. However, I decided to go up and talk to the president and tell him that I intend to be a queen next year. Mr. Beveridge did not laugh at me, but looked me in the eye, held my hand and said, 'Somehow I think you will.' Those 5 words drove me, and the next year I was a queen." Mary Kay preached and practiced that the first step in achieving success is to firmly believe that you are an excellent person who deserves success. In an article in Personal Excellence, she suggested some exercise to help create your image of excellence and begin to establish an atmosphere of success in your life. Here are some of her suggestions. Imagine yourself successful. Always picture yourself successful. Visualize the person you desire to become. Set aside time each day to be alone and undisturbed. Get comfortable and relax. Close your eyes and concentrate on your desires and goals. See yourself in this new environment capable and self-confident. Reflect on your past success. Every success, be it large or small, is proof that you are capable of achieving more success. Celebrate each success. You can recall it when you begin to lose faith in yourself. Set definite goals. Have a clear direction of where you want to go. Be aware when you begin to deviate from these goals and take immediate corrective action. Respond positively to life. Develop a positive self-image. Your image, your reaction to life, and your decision are completely within your control. Desire outwits Mother Nature. As a fitting climax to this chapter, I wish to introduce one of the most unusual people I have ever known. I first saw him a few minutes after he was born. He came into the world without any physical sign of ears, and the doctor admitted, when he pressed for an opinion, that the child might be deaf and mute for a life. I challenged the doctor's opinion. I had the right to do so. I was the child's father. I too reached a decision and rendered an opinion, but I expressed the opinion silently, in the secrecy of my own heart. I decided that my son would hear and speak. Nature could send me a child without ears, but nature could not induce me to accept the reality of the affliction. In my own mind, I knew that my son would hear and speak. How? I was sure that must be a way, and I knew I would find it. I thought of the words of the immortal Emerson. The whole course of things goes to teach us faith. We need only obey. There is a guidance for each of us, and by lowly listening, we shall hear the right word. The right word, desire. More than anything else, I desired that my son should not be a deaf mute. From the desire I never receded, not for a second. Many years previously, I had written, our only limitation are those we set up in our own minds. For the first time, I wonder if that statement were true. Lying on the bed in front of me was a newly born child, without the natural equipment of hearing. Even though he might hear and speak, he was obviously disfigured for life. Surely this was a limitation which that child had not set up in his own mind. What could I do about it? Somehow I would find a way to transplant into the child's mind my own burning desire for ways and means of conveying sound to his brain without the aid of ears. As soon as the child was old enough to cooperate, I would fill his mind so completely with the burning desire to hear that nature would, by methods of her own, translate it into physical reality. All this thinking took place in my own mind, and I spoke of it to no one. Every day I renewed the pledge I had made to myself not to accept a deaf mute for a son. As he grew older and began to take notice of things around him, he observed that he had a slight degree of hearing. When he reached the age when children usually being talking, he made no attempt to speak. But we could tell by his action that he could hear certain sounds slightly. That was all I wanted to know. I was convinced that if he could hear even slightly, he might develop still greater hearing capacity. Then something happened, which gave me hope. It came from an entirely unexpected source. He bought a record player. When the child heard the music for the first time, he went into ecstasias and promptly appropriated the machine. He soon showed a preference for certain records. Among them, It's a Long Way to Tipperary. On one occasion, he played that piece of over and over for almost 2 hours, standing in front of the record player with his teeth clamped on the edge of the case. The significance of this self-formed habit of his did not become clear to us until years later, for we had never heard of the principle of bone conduction of sound at that time. Shortly after he appropriated the record player, I discovered that he could hear me quite clearly when I spoke with my lips touching his mastoid bone behind the ear or at the base of the brain. These discoveries placed in my possession the necessary media by which I began to translate into reality my burning desire to help my son develop hearing and speech. By that time he was making stabs at speaking certain words. The outlook was far from encouraging, but desire backed by faith no such word as impossible. Having determined that he could hear the sound of my voice plainly, I began immediately to transfer to his mind the desire to hear and speak. I soon discovered that the child enjoyed bedtime stories, so I went to work creating stories designed to develop in him self-reliance, imagination, and a keen desire to hear and to be normal. There was one story in particular which I emphasized by giving it some new and dramatic coloring each time it was told. It was designed to plant in his mind the thought that his affliction was not liability but an asset of great value. Despite the fact that all the philosophy I had examined clearly indicated that every adversity brings within the seed of an equivalent advantage, I must confess that I had not the slightest idea how this affliction could ever become an asset. However, I continued my practice of wrapping that philosophy in bedtime stories, hoping the time would come when he would find some plan by which his handicap could be made to serve some useful purpose. Reason told me plainly that there was no adequate compensation for the lack of ears and natural hearing equipment. Desire backed by faith pushed reason aside and inspired me to carry on. As I analyze the experience in retrospect, I can see now that my son's faith in me had much to do with the outstanding results. He did not question anything I told him. I sold him the idea that he had a distinct advantage over his older brother, and that this advantage would reflect itself in many ways. For example, the teachers in school would observe that he had no ears, and because of this, they would show him special attention and treat him with extraordinary kindness. They always did. His mother saw to that by visiting the teachers and arranging with them to give the child the extra attention necessary. I sold him the idea too that when he became old enough to sell newspaper, his older brother had already become a newspaper merchant. He would have a big advantage over his brother, as people would pay him extra money for his ways because they could see he was bright, industrious boy despite the fact he had no ears. We noticed that gradually the child hearing was improving. Moreover, he had not the slightest tendency to be self-conscious because of his affliction. When he was about 7, he showed the first evidence that our method of servicing his mind was bearing fruit. For several months he begged for the privilege of selling newspapers, but his mother would not give her consent. She was afraid that his deafness made it unsafe for him to go on the street alone. Finally, he took matters in his own hands. One afternoon, when he was left at home with the servants, he climbed through the kitchen window, shined to the ground, and set out his own. He borrowed 6 cents in capital from the neighborhood shoemaker, invested in papers, sold out, reinvested, and kept repeating until late in the evening. After balancing his accounts and paying back the 6 cents he had borrowed from his banker, he had a net profit of 42 cents. When we got home that night, we found him in the bed asleep, with the money tightly clenched in his hand. His mother opened his hand, removed the coins, and cried. Of all things, crying over her son's first victory seemed so inappropriate. My reaction was the reverse. I laughed heartily, for I knew that my endeavor to plant in the child's mind an attitude of faith in himself had been successful. His mother saw in his first business venture a little deaf boy who had gone out in the streets and risked his life to earn money. I saw a brave, ambitious, self-reliant little businessman whose stock in himself had increased 100% because he had gone into business on his own initiative and had won. The transition pleased me because I knew he had given evidence of a trait of resourcefulness that would go with him all through life. Later events proved this to be true. When his older brother wanted something, he would lie down on the floor, kick his feet in the air, cry for it, and get it. When the little deaf boy wanted something, he would plan a way to earn the money, then buy it for himself. He still follows that plan. Truly, my own son has taught me that handicaps can be converted into stepping stones on which one may climb towards some worldly goal, unless they are accepted as obstacles and used as alibis. The little deaf boy went through the grades, high schools, and college without being able to hear his teachers, except when they shouted loudly at close range. He did not go to a school for the deaf. We would not permit him to learn sign language. We were determined that he should live a normal life and associate with normal children, and we stood by the decision, although it cost us many heated debates with school officials. While he was in high school, he tried an electrical hearing aid, but it was of no value to him. We believe this was due to a condition that was disclosed when the child was 6. Doctor J. Gotchen Wilson of Chicago operated on one side of the boy's head and discovered that there was no sign of natural hearing equipment. During his last week in college, 18 years after the operation, something happened which marked the most important turning point of his life. Though what seemed to be mere chance, he came into possession of another electrical hearing device, which was sent to him on trial. He was slow about testing it, due to his disappointment with similar device. Finally, he picked the instrument up and more or less carelessly placed it on his head, hooked up the battery, and lo, as if by a stroke of magic, his lifelong desire for normal hearing became a reality. For the first time in his life, he heard practically as well as any person with normal hearing. God moves in mysterious way, his wonders to perform overjoyed because of the changed world that had been brought to him through his hearing device. He rushed to the telephone, called his mother, and heard her voice perfectly. The next day, he plainly heard the voice of his professor in class for the first time in his life. He heard the radio, he heard the cinema for the first time in his life. He could converse freely with other people without them having to speak loudly. Truly, he had come into possession of a changed world. We had refused to accept nature's error, and by persistent desire, we had induced nature to correct that error through the only practical means available. Desire had commenced to pay dividends, but the victory was not yet complete. The boy still had to find definite and practical way to convert his handicap into an equivalent asset. Hardly realizing the significance of what had already been accomplished, but intoxicated with the joy of his newly discovered world of sound, he wrote a letter to the manufacturer of the hearing aid, enthusiastically describing his experience, something in his letter, something perhaps which was not written on the lines but between them, caused the company to invite him to New York. When he arrived, he was escorted through the factory. While talking with the chief engineer, telling him about his changed world, a hunch, an idea, or an inspiration, call it what you wish, flashed into in his mind, it was the impulse of thought which converted his affliction into an asset of destined to pay dividends in both money and happiness to thousands for all time to come. The sum and substance of that impulse of thought was this: it occurred to him that he might be of help to the millions of deaf people who go through life without the benefit of hearing devices, if he could find a way to tell them the story of his changed world. Then and there he reached a decision to devote the remainder of his life to providing a useful service to hard of hearing. For an entire month he carried out intensive research. He analyzed the entire marketing system of the manufacture of the hearing device and created ways and means of communicating with the hard of hearing all over the world for the purpose of sharing with them his newly discovered changed world. When this was done, he wrote a 2-year plan based upon his findings. On presenting the plan to the company, he was instantly given a position for the purpose of carrying out his ambition. Little did he dream, when he went to work, that he was destined to bring hope and practical relief to thousands of deaf people who, without his help, would have been doomed forever to deaf mutism. Shortly after he became associated with the manufacture of his hearing aid, he invited me to attend a class conducted by his company for the purpose of teaching deaf mutes to hear and speak. I had never heard of such a form of education. Therefore, I visited the class skeptically but hopefully that my time would not be entirely wasted. Here I saw a demonstration that gave me a greatly enlarged vision of what I had done to arouse and keep alive in my son's mind the desire for normal hearing. I saw deaf mutes actually begin to taught to hear and speak through applications of the self-same principle I had used more than 20 years previously in saving my son from deaf mutism. Thus, through some strange turn of the wheel of fate, my son Blair and I were destined to aid in correcting deaf mutism for those as yet unborn. There is no doubt in my mind that Blair would have been a deaf mute all his life if his mother and I had not managed to shape his mind as we did. When Blair was an adult, Dr. Irving Harris, a noted specialist on such cases, examined him thoroughly. He was astounded when he learned how well my son hears and speaks, and said his examination indicated that theoretically the boy should not be able to hear at all. But the lad does hear, despite the fact that X-rays pictures show there is no opening in the skull whatsoever from where his ears should be to the brain. When I planted in his mind the desire to hear and talk and live as a normal person, there went with that impulse some strange influence which caused nature to become bridge builder and span the gulf of silence between his brain and the outer world by some means which the keenest medical specialists have not been able to interpret. It would be sacrilege for me to even conjecture as how nature performed this miracle. It would be unforgivable if I neglected to tell the world as much as I know of the humble part as I assumed in the strange experience. It is my duty and a privilege to say I believe, and not without a reason, that nothing is impossible to the person who backs desires with enduring faith. I have no doubt that a burning desire has devious ways of transmuting itself into a physical equivalent. Blair desired normal hearing, now he has it. He was born with a handicap, which might easily have sent one with a less defined desire to the street with bundle of pencils and a tin cup. That handicap now promises to serve as the medium by which he will render useful service to many millions of hard of hearing, as well as to give him a useful employment and adequate financial compensation for the remainder of his life. The little white lies I planted in his mind when he was a child, leading him to believe this affliction would become a great asset on which he could capitalize, have been justified. There is nothing right or wrong which belief plus burning desire cannot make real. These qualities are free to everyone. In all my experience in dealing with men and women who had personal problems, I never handled a single case which more definitely demonstrates the power of desires. Authors sometimes make the mistake of writing of subjects of which they have but superficial or very elementary knowledge. It has been my good fortune to have had the privilege of testing the soundness of the power of desire through the affliction of my own son. Perhaps it was providential that the experience came as it did, for surely no one is better prepared than he to serve as an example of what happens when the desire is put to the test. If Mother Nature bends to the will of desire, is it logical that mere men can defeat the burning desire? Strange and imponderable is the power of the human mind. We do not understand the method by which it uses every circumstance, every individual, every physical thing within its reach as means of transmuting desire into its physical counterpart. Perhaps science will uncover this secret. I planted in my son's mind the desire to hear and to speak, as any normal person hears and speaks. That desire has now become a reality. I planted in his mind the desire to convert his greatest handicap into his greatest asset. That desire has been realized. The modus operandi by which this outstanding result was achieved is not hard to describe. It consisted of three very definite facts. First, I mixed faith with the desire for normal hearing, which I passed on to my son. Second, I communicated my desire to him in every conceivable way available, through persistence, continuous effort over a period of years. Third, he believed me. Several years ago, one of my business associates became ill. He became worse as the time went on, and finally was taken to the hospital for an operation. Just before he was wheeled into the operation room, I took a look at him and wondered how anyone as thin and emaciated as he could possibly go through a major operation successfully. The doctor warned me that there was little if any chance of my ever seeing him alive again, but that was the doctor's opinion. It was not the opinion of the patient. Just before he was wheeled away, he whispered feebly, "Do not be disturbed, Chief. I will be out of here in a few days." The attending nurse looked at me with pity, but the patient did come through safely. After it was all over, his physician said nothing but his own desire to live saved him. He never would have pulled through if he had not refused to accept the possibility of death. I believe in the power of desire backed by the faith because I have seen this power lift people from low beginnings to places of power and wealth. I have seen it rob the grave of its victims. I have seen it serve as the medium by which people staged a comeback after having been defeated in 100 different ways. I have seen it provide my own son with normal, happy, successful life despite nature having sent him into the world without ears. How can one harness and use the power of desire? This has been answered through this chapter and the subsequent chapters of this book. I wish to convey the thought that all achievement, no matter what its nature or purpose, must begin with an intense burning desire for something definite. Through some strange and powerful principle of mental chemistry, nature wraps up in the impulse of strong desire, that something which recognizes no such word as impossible and accepts no such reality as failure.